So as developers, we want to know the state of our application at any point in time and also easily test every case to make sure our app is responding appropriately. That's where Bloc comes in, which stands for Business Logic Components. So it's a state management system for Flutter, and it helps in managing the states and makes access to data from a central place in your project. So it basically encapsulates the business logic of your application, and it acts as a mediator between the UI layer and also the data layer, handling the processing of events and also emitting corresponding states. So in today's tutorial, I'll demonstrate how Bloc operates by using an example that involves retrieving GitHub users from an API in this tutorial. So with that said, let's jump right in. So following the architectural part, we have the presentation layer where all the UIs are found. So it contains the screens, pages, and also the widgets. We also have the data layer, which is responsible for retrieving data from one or more sources and also manipulating that data. Under the data layer, we have the data provider. So the data provider basically provides us the data and also exposes the APIs from a remote source. The data layer also contains the repository layer. So it's basically a wrapper around one or more data providers with which the Bloc layer communicates. And finally, we have the Bloc layer, which handles the business logic, right, the functionality of the app. So starting with data provider, we have a class of data provider that has one method of fetch user, which takes in the username, right? So we have our endpoints here, api.github.com/users. Then we search for a particular user, passing in the username over here. Then we make a request using the HTTP, right? So to make sure the URL is in a valid format, we use the URI.pass, then we pass in the API URL. Then we check the status of the response. If that's 200, we get the user data that comes in the form of map of string with dynamic values, right? And decode the body of the response. Then we return user.from JSON, then we pass in our user data, right? So we want our fetch user function to return, the return type of that should be the user, right? That's the model we just created. So when I check this user over here, that's found within the model, we can see we are accessing the login. That basically brings us the name, the avatar URL, and also the bio over here. Then we have from JSON method and also to JSON method over here. So within the data provider, we want the return type to be a user, right? So if it doesn't go through, we throw an exception. I also catch an exception over here, right? So under the user repository, we inject our data provider and require that in the constructor. Then we make the same function, fetch user, passing the username, and try and get our data from the data provider. So we return await data provider, then we fetch our user, passing the username, right? If you have any error, we catch it over here by throwing an exception. So that's basically what should be within the repository. So let's move on to the Bloc layer over here. So within the Bloc, I'll be creating a new class, right? So we have an extension that will create a class for you. So the name of this class is going to be the user block, right? So I'll name it as user, right? So it's going to create a user block, a user event in the user state over here. So I'll add that, right? So now when I open within my Bloc directory, you can see you have a user block, a user event, and also the user state. So within the user block, right, make sure you have the import from the Flutter block. So I'll just remove this import and import the block from Flutter block. So make sure you have that imported. So once we have that imported, we get error within the event and also the state, right? So since we are using that immutable, we can just import the material.dat and that will fix the error. So within the user state, we're here, right? So basically when we're fetching an API, there are three things we consider under the hood. The loading state, when we encounter an error, and also when there's a success state, right? So that's basically the state over here. So we have an initial state. I'll repeat that 3 more times. Over here, we'll be having our user loading, right? That's when we initiate the call to fetch our user, right? And that's going to extend the use state. We also be having a user loaded class. That's the success state and also a user error. This is basically when we get the error. So these are basically the states we are going to have when fetching a user, right? So when the user is loaded, we need to get the user back, right? So I'll be creating a variable which is going to be of type user entity, right? The user within the model. So make sure you have the user imported, right? And that's going to be from our model, and proceed to require that in the constructor, right? So within the constructor, so the user loaded, and we're passing this dot user. There we go. So we'll be doing same within the error, right? We want to know the error state, right? So we'll be creating a variable of error message that's going to be of a 10 type string, and do same by requiring that in the constructor, right? So final string error message. So here we having the user error, then we pass in this dot error message. So that's basically it. So when we are in our user loading, right, we don't want to do anything, right? We use that state to check and return a widget. So when the user is loaded, we need to get the user back. When we get any error, we need to return the error. Within the user event, right, there's one use case over here. That's only when we are fetching the user, right? If you have any use case, you need to add that. For instance, if we want to get all users and also any other use case, right? So in our situation, we're only going to fetch user, right? So that's going to be our event over here. So I'm going to create a class of fetch user event, and this is going to extend the user event, right? Remember, when fetching user event, we pass in the username, right? So we need to pass in a variable over here, and that's going to be final string of username. We do same by passing that within the constructor, right? So it's going to be this dot username. There we go. So that's basically going to be what is going to find within our username. Sorry, within our user event. And within the user block is where the magic happens, right? So first of all, let's bring in our user repository over here, right? We need to inject our user repository over here. So final user repository. Then the variable name is going to be user repository. So let's make sure that it's required within the user block constructor. So require this dot user repository, right? I think for now we can just get rid of this event, right? And return the fetch user event. So on, we have access to the event and also the emit state, right? So the type of this event is going to be the fetch user event, right? That takes in the event and also the emit state over here. So make sure we have the user repository imported, right? So once we have that imported within the function, first of all, let's emit user loading, right? Before we initiate the fetch of the user, right? So we need to emit the user loading. So after that, we can use try and catch block over here. So in our try block, so first of all, let's make this an asynchronous function. I'll start by creating a variable of user, then we await and call a user repository instance, then which has a fetch user method that we need to pass in the username, right? So we can get the username from the event, right? The event is more or less like the input over here. So event the username. Then we can emit a new state, right? So the new state is going to be when our user was successful. So we return the user loaded, right? We takes in the user. You can see we have access to the user over here. Then we pass in that user. There we go. If anything goes wrong, that will happen within the catch block. So in here we also emit a different state, and the state is going to be the user error. In here we need to pass in the error, right? You can have access to the error over here. So pass in e.toString. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it over here. So basically we are calling our fetch user event, right? And we are using our user repository, which has the fetch user method, and it's passing the username and emitting a state of user loaded and passing our user, right? So let's proceed to provide this user block to our home page. So I'll remove the home page over here and return the block provider. So this basically provides the block to the sub widgets beneath it, right? So it takes in the create function. So in here it takes in the context, so I'll move it an underscore, then return the user block over here. You can see the user block takes in the user repository, right? So I need to pass in the user repository, and also the user repository also requires the data provider, right? So you can see this is the concept of dependency injection, right? You are basically injecting our data provider in the user repository, which also in turn we pass it on to the user provider over here, right? So the block provider takes in the child, where you can just provide it our home page widget, right? So we are basically injecting our user block to our home page so we can have access. So when we move into our home widget over here, you can see we've created a username controller for handling the user name input. We have our app bar that display the user profile, and also within the body we have a text field and also a button that triggers the call. So within the button, within the press of the button, you can see we are accessing a username controller test and assigning to a variable of username. So in here we check for the username if it's not empty, right? So if username dot is not empty, we check if it's not empty, then we proceed to add a function that will fetch the user, right? And to do that, we use context.read, right? So the type of this is going to be a user block, right? So we can add an event, right? And the event we have is the fetch user event. We takes in the username, then we pass in the username, just like this. So this basically will trigger the function and fetch the user, right? I think that's basically it. So you can see we have our input field and also the button that will fetch the user. So let's proceed to display it below the button, right? So over here, we start with the block builder. So this basically rebuilds the UI when there's changes within the state, right? So it takes in the builder, and the builder over here is a function that is in the context and also the state. So you can see passing the state as well, and returns the region based on the condition of the state. So the type of this block builder is going to have two types over here. So that's going to be a user block and also the user state, right? So we specifically passing the type over here, the user block and also the user state. So within the builder, you can check the different states over here, right? So first of all, let's check if the state is loading, right? If the state is user loading. So basically we are going to show the circular progress indicator over here. So here return the circular progress indicator, just like this. You can also check if we have our user back, right? So else if, then we check for the state. If the state is user loaded, right, that's when we get our user back. That's a successful fetch of our user. So if the state is user loaded, first of all, you can just grab the user from the state, right? So I'll create a variable of user, and you can access the user from the state dot user, just like this. Then we can just return a column over here, and the column takes in the children. There we go. So in here, let's first of all set the main axis alignment of the column to be main axis alignment of center, and within the children over here, we will display a circle avatar to show the image of the user, right? So with the radius of 50, you can also pass in the background image. Since we are accessing this image online, you can use the network image, then we pass in a user.avatar URL, just like this. So below the avatar is going to be the username as well. That's basically going to be in a text widget, right? So I'll provide a space, so I'll just grab the size box for spacing, and below that we'll be having a text displaying the username, right? So the username is going to be a user login, right? Just like this, right? So below that, we're also going to show the bio of the user, right? So I'll repeat that, and it's going to be user.bio. And you can also check the other state as well. So for now, we've handled when the user is loading and also when we get the user back. So we can also check if the state is user error, right? We want to display to the user, right? Something went wrong. So if the state is user error, you can actually also return a test widget with a message of the error message. So it's going to be user, oh sorry, you can access the error from the state over here. It's going to be state.error message. My bad. There you go. And you can also check for the user initial as well. If you are in our initial state, right, you can just display some kind of a message to the user that maybe enter the username to get the details. So enter username to get details. So you also need to handle the default case, right? So else you can also return a text of no user available. So basically, block builder listen to the changes and acts accordingly, right, based on the states, and rebuilds the UI. There we go. So you can see over here. So I'll start by typing my username, GitHub username, that's coded up and fetch user. And there we go. You can see my profile, my username, and also the bio. So let me enter some random name. You can see we get an error, and the error is being displayed, right? So I'll go with another name which I know. And there we go. All right. So see you in our next tutorial. Until then, stay tuned.